Hello, Steve Stine here. Glad to be here and help you with some things that we're going to be doing with guitar today. I have a number of questions to get to. So first of all, I hope your weekend is going well, and let's go ahead and get started on some stuff. So, first thing I have here, it says, good morning, Steve. If you have the time to explain call and response lead playing. Also, are you going to be teaching your lead soloing class anytime soon, or will it be available online? Thanks and have a blessed Christmas and New Year. Tim Castleberry. Hello, Tim. Will I be teaching my lead soloing class? It depends on which one it is. But in 2015, I'm telling you, there's all kinds of really cool stuff that I've got planned, a bunch of stuff that I've been working on. So there's all kinds of different things. So I'm not sure exactly which lead class, because I have a bunch of different things like that. If it's the guitar soloing master class, I'm not sure when that comes back around again. You know, some of these master classes, if you don't take them, it takes a year for them to come back around. So I'm not sure which one, but let's get to your question, Tim. Explain call and response lead playing. Really, if you think about it, when I was a kid, I used to play with one of my favorite albums to jam along with, because I just started learning how to do guitar stuff, was called Back in Black by AC/DC. And so what I would do is, when Brian Johnson, the singer for AC/DC at that time, when he would sing, I would wait for him to finish what he was singing, and then I would try and like solo in between the things that he was doing. So for instance, I would put on, and this is of course dating me a bit, but I would put on the record, and I would play along with every song on the first side or the second side, whichever one I was doing. I would learn how to play all the songs, and that way I didn't have to keep trying to change records out, because if you grew up with records, it was a pain to try and solo along with stuff like that. Now you got like digital, and you can just click on the song that you want and go. But back then it didn't work that way. So I would put on a song, like I'd have Back in Black playing, right? And he'd start singing, and what I would do is I would try and play in between his vocal lines instead of just playing over the top of him. So really what call and response lead playing is essentially is that somebody is singing and then somebody else is singing. We're just doing it with our guitars, obviously, right? So when somebody is singing, you, like, for instance, there's two different kinds of call and response that I think about on a regular basis. One of them, let me get a couple things closed here. There we go. One of them is going to be something like, for instance, if somebody was playing a little solo, they're going like this. We're playing over blues, right? So we've got, we're in the key there. So somebody goes, and then you're going to solo, right? So that was a call. Now, there's two different kinds of things that you can do with a call and a response. If we think about the traditional aspect of call and response, if we look at a traditional 12-bar blues system, you know, you think about something like Jimi Hendrix's Red House, where he would say, there's a red house over yonder, that's where my baby stays. And then there'd be a repeat of that. There's a red house over yonder, that's where my baby stays. The response then would be the, I ain't been home to see my baby in 99 1/2 days. And that's kind of the traditional setup of early blues. So with guitar playing, when we're doing lead solo and response, what we're thinking about is somebody just played something. And then we're going to solo next, right? So they just did something. So we have to decide whether or not we're going to respond with something that is comparable with that. It might not be exactly the same thing, because if we're actually improvising and jamming, we might not be grabbing exactly the same thing that somebody did, but we might repeat something that's very similar in rhythm, very similar in pitch content, something like that. That would be a response that we could make. Or what we do is we respond completely the opposite, right? So if somebody goes, and then you come back with, you see, all of a sudden you're doing something completely different. You're coming from the back side or the lower side, and you're moving forward. So when you're soloing, that's kind of the fun of all of this stuff, is trying to figure out, when you're playing with somebody, what you're going to repeat. Now, if we think about this, and this is something I always have to kind of remind people, is when you're actually soloing, when you're working on soloing, and you're going to be soloing in a realistic situation where you're going to be, you know, on stage or in front of people or whatever it might be, your solos are going to be 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 7 seconds, right? Usually a solo in a song is pretty short. So in that situation, we really wouldn't have a call and response because there wouldn't be much time. But if you are in a situation where, let's say you're playing a cool jam thing. I remember in one of the bands I used to play in, we used to do The Zoo by the Scorpions. And it had this kind of thing. And so you could solo all day over the top of that because it was in the key of E minor. So even though it's not blues, it would be a perfect opportunity for me and the other guitar player to kind of banter back and forth, and that's what we used to do. We used to go out and we'd walk on tables and whatever, and he'd be soloing and he'd go like, right? And then it would be my turn, the music's going. Right? So we're responding to each other. It's not always by doing exactly the same thing, but what happens is when it starts off, of course, we're soloing and kind of keeping everything kind of cool and kind of slow. Maybe you start using some repetition, right? Okay, and then he would go and maybe he'd be doing something kind of the same sort of thing. And then what we would do is we would begin escalating the intensity of what we're doing, right? So we'd start going faster, and he'd start going faster. So now again, in the response, the call and response effect of it, it's not necessarily the lick itself, it's the intensity of what we're doing. So as he starts playing a little faster, I start playing a little faster, and maybe our solos even start getting a little bit closer together, right? So maybe he's got 2 measures, I got 2 measures. And then all of a sudden he's got 1 measure and I got 1 measure, or a phrase and a phrase, or something like that. And then it makes the impact even more intense because everything starts getting closer and closer. So you wouldn't really be doing a call and response necessarily. You could do it on your own too. I mean, obviously, if you're not playing with another guitar player and you're trying to create call and response, think about it. If I was doing, that's my rhythm, and I do this. And I do it again. At the same time. Here comes my E. You see what I mean? Now, I wouldn't want to do that every single time, but I really have created a call and response of myself by doing something that a vocalist would do. I've just created some sort of phrase. And then I could come back to that. I always think of guys like Joe Satriani, for instance. Joe Satriani will create a melodic kind of motif to his solo, or to his song, I should say. And he'll do that, and then he'll move it up an octave, and then he'll go off somewhere else, and then he'll end the song by coming back to it again, which is not unlike a singer would do in a situation like that. So I hope that kind of explains kind of the concept of call and response with 2 separate guitar players, depending on the amount of time that you've got. And remember, it doesn't mean that you got to repeat the exact same thing. Sometimes you do something completely the opposite, and it's more of a response idea, where the call would be, you know, hey, and then the audience goes, hey. That's the call idea. And the response would be, how do we end it? How do we get out of that? So you can go back and forth all kinds of different ways with that, whether it's with another person or by yourself. The next question I've got is from AJ, and AJ is wondering how to put bends and vibrato and all of those kind of musical elements together to actually make things sound musical. So AJ, welcome. Let's talk about that a little bit. This is the trick, isn't it, to all of these things that we discuss on a regular basis, is how to put these together to make them sound musical to you and possibly to your listener, right? So if I think about it, what I like to do a lot, and I explain this a lot in my videos, but you have to learn to be confident with the elements that you're going to use. If you decide you want to do a harmony bend, you got to sell that harmony bend. You got to make sure that the bend is getting up high enough right? You have to make sure that all your other strings are muted so they're not making noise. And so it's all those fundamental elements that you have to make sure that individually, your bend or your vibrato or your sliding or whatever it is that you're doing, AJ, that you're putting them together, but each one individually has merit of its own. It's comfortable, it's confident, and it has attitude. You know, whatever it is that you're trying to play, it doesn't really matter what it is, whether you're moving, you know, vertically or horizontally, or you're playing a lick, or you're just trying to kind of meander, whatever those things are. The trick is not always being overwhelmed by being nervous and then start trying to play too fast. That's one of the #1 things that people do, is they try and cram everything that they possibly know into one little segment of an idea. You know, when you're on stage, depending on what you do, you know, I've been on stage for 40 minutes before, and I've been on stage for 4 hours before. But in either case, the trick is to make sure that as you're playing, you're trying to make a variety of different things. You're not trying to cram everything that you possibly know into one small idea. You know, again, as I just said with Tim's question, sometimes you have a solo that isn't very long, and so you don't have a lot of time to try and develop something. If you've only got 5 seconds or 10 seconds for a solo, which is pretty reasonable to be honest with you, you don't want to try and just come out of the gate doing everything that you possibly can in those 10 seconds, you know what I mean? You got to play what's relative to the song. So the first element is being confident with the independent elements, right? If you want to do a bend on the first string, you want to be confident with that bend or the connections between the notes, whatever it might be. And again, when I'm soloing, like what I'm doing for you right now, even though we use the term improvisation, improvisation is still a collection of thoughts that have to stream in some methodical way, right? I mean, I don't have a clue how to play accordion, so true improvisation would be me grabbing an accordion and trying to figure out how it goes in front of a group of people. Improvisation is really kind of regurgitation of elements that you've done before. You just don't know in what capacity you're going to do them. You don't know what order they're going to come out. You don't know, I mean, there's all kinds of isms or questions, I should say, of how these pieces are going to work together. And of course, that's why jamming is so incredibly important, and learning is so incredibly important, because you want to keep expanding your thoughts on what your options are. So if I start here on the first string on the 10th fret, and I'm going to do a bend and then a vibrato, I don't know in which order am I going to do a vibrato on this note? Well, I very well could. But when I get done, I still have to decide, where am I going to go next? What's my avenue of travel, right? Do I want to go, and maybe I want to go up horizontally on the guitar, and then what am I going to do, right? Then do I come down? Maybe I do more of an arpeggiated idea somehow to get down. Now again, I'm not exactly sure which order I'm going to go, but the trick is when I'm actually playing in front of an audience versus playing by myself. And let me explain that to you, AJ, as best I can. When I'm jamming, and I know there's a couple other questions in here that I've got about preparatory things and stuff like that I'll get to, but if I'm sitting in my room and I'm trying to create things, I'm practicing elements, I'm practicing licks, I'm practicing phrases, my technique, whatever it might be, that's the time that I'm trying to figure out how to effectively play these elements. Then what I will do is I will jam and try and kind of bring some of these elements to fruition in my jamming, right? So I'm still practicing. For me, there's a difference between practicing and playing. When I'm in front of an audience and I'm playing, I am going to try out things. There's no doubt about it. I try out things. But I'm also going to make sure that I use what works, because these people paid money to come and see me play. So I'm not out there just trying to figure out how to stroke my own ego to try and figure out how to do things I've never done before. Yes, I'm going to use certain elements of that, but I'm also going to just be using my natural ability, and that's what we're trying to focus on, AJ, with you and me and everybody else, is what do you have that's natural? So when you go to do a bend or a vibrato, where do you go? I mean, if we're in the key of E, where do you go? Where's the first place that you go on your guitar? Do you go down here? Or do you go here? Or do you go here? See, for me, the guitar is kind of broken into sections, right? If I want to sing more melodically and kind of build, if I've just started soloing over something and it's kind of mellow, I don't want to come up here going and just making a bunch of noise over stuff, or really loud, because the song hasn't really gotten there yet. So I might start off a little more mellow. Maybe a little call and response. And then maybe I move into whatever it might be, right? So the trick to making things sound musical is if you've watched any of my stuff before, which obviously you have, AJ, and thank you for that, is using what I call dynamic contrast or variation. Always think about, again, number one, the elements are, each individual element has to be comfortable, has to be confident, has to be effective. If you're going to do a bend, make sure that that bend is comfortable for you. Make sure you can execute that bend with attitude, right? Whatever it is you want to do with that bend. Then the second step is trying to figure out how to attach pieces together in your natural flow of things. So if I'm up here, where am I going to go? Am I going to go this way? Am I going to go this way? Am I going to go this way? And that's where my dynamic contrast or variation comes in that I talk about a lot, is whatever it is I choose to do, I need to be aware that the next time around, unless I'm trying to create something that is repetitive over and over and over, it's going to be different. So if I go, maybe now it's time to get out of there, right? See how I use a blues note in there? Maybe I do something like that. And then again, I'm always thinking about slow versus fast, right? I don't always want to play super fast. I want to slow things down, use repetition. Whatever it is. And so what I like to do, and I don't do it as much anymore, but I used to do it all the time, and I should still do it, is write down ideas. They could be specific ideas like arpeggio, tap, hammer-on, pull-off, open string, repetition, lick, pattern. And then it could be things like vertical, horizontal, slow, fast, high, low. And you write all these down on a piece of paper, and then when you sit down to actually do your actual improvisation jamming, right now you're not developing a concept like a lick or something like that. You just did that. That's what you were working on before. Now you sit down with your jam track, and you're trying to sort of feel what's happening with that jam track. You're responding to the music, you're responding to the rhythm, you're responding to the chords. And now that's where you have that piece of paper that you start thinking, okay, all right, I should start off with hammer-on pull-off. Okay, now I need to go into some sort of contrast. So I'm going to use one string or two strings. I love like you two-string things because there's so many little wraparound things that you can do, and then you can build it so you don't have to feel like you're always having to travel this way. So AJ, I hope that kind of helps. I mean, it's obviously hard to just discuss exactly how to put them together in a musical way, but I can guarantee you the first way of being able to make it sound musical is that each piece independently has to withstand the confidence itself, right? Your bend has to be good, your vibrato has to be good, your hammer-on has to be good, or whatever it is. to be able to collectively start trying to flow back and forth between them, you have to be good at those. Because I find a lot of times when people try and solo, they might be doing something and they try and play something too fast, or they go for a bend or a lick and it really isn't ready. And so when they try and execute it, it doesn't come off as being smooth, or I don't want to say flawless, because I mean we're all flawed, but it definitely doesn't come off as being overly smooth. So think about that when you're trying to solo, AJ. All right, let's see here. Mark, hello, Mark. Mark has Mark Serrato, I think. Sorry if I mispronounced that. It says, I would like some more examples on adding the sixth and the ninths into leads. I want to make sure I fully understand the concept. I'm looking forward to the next class on modern blues. I am too. It's going to be really fun. There's going to be a ton of cool stuff in there. I have seen other videos and lessons on learning blues and lead, but yours is the best. Thank you so much. So let's go ahead and talk about that, Mark. The sixth and the ninth. First, let's explain what we're dealing with here. Let's go back to the key of A minor pentatonic. Okay, so I'm just going to be at the 5th fret here playing pentatonic. Okay, so I have my whole palette of pentatonic. And before we get started, Mark, I want to remind you of this idea that I don't remember where I learned it or where I thought of it or where it came from, but we as humans have a tendency of wanting to streamline everything, to make everything just one continuous motion so it makes things easier for us, and I totally get that. But when it comes to soloing, what I want you to think about is that sometimes it's nice to be able to move between layers. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times as guitar players, we tend to think of pentatonic as being a beginner's scale, and then diatonic or modes as being the advanced player's scales. And that couldn't be further from the truth. There isn't any effective guitar player out there that plays diatonic and never plays pentatonic, or vice versa, really. The reason why you'd know pentatonic and not know diatonic or modes is because you haven't studied them, and that's what you're asking about, is the sixths and the ninths, and I totally get that. So what I want you to think about with this layer concept is that it is very effective to be playing pentatonically and then add extra notes into the pentatonic sound to create a fresh new color. I remember, I think it was a drummer that I played with for many, many years. He said to me, he goes, I want you to always remember, when I first started kind of getting out and doing a lot of gigging and things like that, a lot of playing, he said, always remember that whatever is impressive, if you do it too much, it's no longer impressive. And it's the total truth. I mean, Superman could be here, right? And saving the earth, and at 5 years, 10 years later, we just take it for granted because he's just going to be there doing his thing, and we don't really care anymore. And so the trick is that pentatonic leaves a lot to be desired. It's not that it's not an awesome scale. It is. There's a million cool things, but it is lacking in tonality because there's a limited amount of notes. So what makes the sixth and the ninth, and we'll start with the ninth first, what makes the ninth so awesome is it's a fresh sound. If you overuse it, it is no longer a fresh sound. It's just part of the norm. So let's think of the pentatonic as being the norm. Okay, so we're playing in pentatonic. Whatever it is, right? But then here comes that ninth. The ninth is up here. Okay, so that ninth, if I was in A minor pentatonic, that ninth is existing. It's called a ninth. It doesn't mean ninth fret. It's called the ninth. Or we can refer to it as the second. So if you were in the key of A, the second note, it would be B technically. We're not playing it pentatonically. So when you try and count pentatonically, it doesn't make any musical sense. You have to count in terms of do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do for like the term ninth or 11th or 7th or those things. Those terms come from diatonic. Pentatonic is not the musical definition. Pentatonic is, always think of pentatonic as being like a skeleton. And the diatonic or do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do scale is the meat that we put on that skeleton. So the pentatonic is there. Once we add the meat on, the pentatonic is still there, but now we see the full picture. We see the full body. And so when we're dealing with terms like ninth or sixth, those terms are coming from do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So when I play this A note, the ninth or the second, and again, we're not going to get overly deep into theory right now, but that note would be B. that note right there. What's nice about that ninth is that it adds a half step for the first time, because pentatonic, the downside to pentatonic is that there's no half steps. It's all whole steps or step and a half. And really, originally, the concept of pentatonic, the nice thing about pentatonic is that there are no wrong notes. So when you play pentatonic, everything fits. And so it's great for beginners, even when we sing. I mean, there's many children's songs that are based off the pentatonic scale, so we teach children how to sing those intervals. But really, the trick here is once we've established that sort of skeletal concept... I'm out of tune a little bit, I apologize for that. Is that ninth all of a sudden adds a nice, fresh... sound. It's very melodic. Now, of course, with anything like that, there's always two ways that I can use a note. I can use it as a melodic element, which means that I'm not so concerned with how fast I can play. I'm concerned with using it as a color sound that my listener is really going to, even if my listener is me, right? Even if I'm improvising. But that'll be good enough for now. Even if that listener is just me, it doesn't make any difference. If I do this, if I do a pentatonic lick from 10 to 8, I can make it sound melodic. It depends on the situation, right? If I'm playing over blues, maybe I'm looking for a groove or whatever, and I'm not so concerned with the color of the notes I'm playing. I'm more concerned with the groove. Right, whatever it might be. But in this case, that ninth, what makes it really nice is I can add it in a melodic sense. Now again, I wouldn't do all of that at the same time, and I certainly wouldn't do it all that fast. But you see, if the listener is hearing the pentatonic, and all of a sudden you go... that ninth all of a sudden just explodes with color because it's something different for the listener to hear. So the first way, and in my opinion, the most important way to use these notes is in a color sense. If you don't use the ninth all the time, again, if we think, well, we know pentatonic, and now we've learned how to add that ninth in. So we're going to add that ninth every single time we play the guitar. Well, now all of a sudden it's not a color note. It's just part of everything else, and so we overuse it. But if we use it sparingly... which, again, guys that I study have done that. Randy Rhoads and Steve Vai and all those guys, that's exactly what they do. So they'll do a lick and then all of a sudden they'll throw that in there. So the first way, obviously, is to add it in melodically. And we're just talking about the ninth for right now. The second thing would be using it as a technical, in a technical aspect, because it gives me 3 notes on a string. So it could potentially give me the ability of being able to play faster because I have more notes on each string. For some people, they're not concerned about that, but for some people, they really are. It's an impact. And again, for me, if you think about what I talked about earlier, it's dynamic contrast. If I'm playing slow, every once in a while, it's nice to play fast. I like to play fast. I just do. I have learned over the years not to do it all the time, and actually age is probably setting in, so I can't do it as well as I used to anyway. But for me, the trick to an effective solo is being able to set somebody up with something that's very comfortable, and it's all right there. Think of, like, for me, like David Gilmour of Pink Floyd, or Eric Clapton. It's all there, right? It all sounds perfect, and then boom, you do something that's just really aggressive or fast, and it just, you know, like John Petrucci from Dream Theater or something like that. You know, there's a host of people out there, but all of a sudden there's this thing, and it just takes it to a whole new level. So if you were playing, let's say you're setting up, I got a little delay going here, right, and I'm kind of setting up a nice little melodic solo. Now I'm going to implement that ninth a little bit as well. Here it comes. Now, it's over A, and now A, obviously, we've been trained to think, well, if an A chord is being played, we should be emphasizing the A in our soloing, and of course, that is true. But it doesn't mean it's the only note that can be emphasized over an A chord. If you know anything about your theory, we know that there's a root and a third and a fifth, and you could emphasize any of those at any time. If you don't know your theory, you can see an A minor chord on your guitar, and you know that you could emphasize this, or this, or this, or this, or this, or this. Any of the chordal tones of that A minor chord, we could emphasize at any time over that, and it'll sound good. The ninth is not a chord tone. It's called a non-chord tone. It's not part of that chord. But if we emphasize it over the A minor sound, and again, I'm not really talking about blues right now, I'm just talking about just soloing. If we emphasize the sound of that ninth, it's not going to sound like a chord tone, which actually can be really, really awesome because it gives the listener something new and fresh. And then we can always resolve it back to something of the chord if we feel the need to. But to be able to emphasize that. So again, the two different worlds. The first world is I'm using that note melodically. I'm squeezing information out of it. I want the audience to hear that I'm using it. However it is. The second way is I'm just using the note in conjunction with other notes to make something faster. For whatever reason, right? Like those kind of patterns, I use that kind of stuff all the time to make faster little licks. Now all of a sudden the notes aren't really as important. The point of the notes are they're just giving me more notes on each string to create patterns that make things faster. So those are the two purposes of the notes that I could play, in this case the ninth. So think about that a little bit, Mark, how you could use that in your playing. So you're playing pentatonically and then you're implementing the ninth in. Okay? Now even if you were playing more of a blues thing or a funky blues, see, I can still use it in conjunction of other things. I can emphasize it. It's just going to have less of a melodic effect now. It's still going to have color. It's still going to add color very well. And so that's how I use the ninth, is I always think about all of these notes. Either I'm using the notes sparingly, so it adds more color when I do use them, or I'm using the notes in conjunction with other notes to create faster patterns or ideas on my fretboard. So even if I was playing something that was just absolutely set up, ready to be modal, right? It's in Dorian or it's in Phrygian or whatever. That doesn't mean that I'm not still going to approach from a pentatonic angle and then just add other notes in to make them more, I don't want to say special, but certainly more colorful. I'll do that all the time. So I might be doing... So you can see I'm just killing this note. Again, I wouldn't sit and do that over and over and over, but if I did, then I've got to contrast that with something that's going to use those notes a little bit less. You see? Or I'm using it... You know, it's just a speed pattern. I'm trying to do something. So again, now those notes are serving a completely different purpose. So they're no longer color sounds. They're just there to create a cool lick or a cool pattern or whatever it might be that I'm doing. So anyway, Mark, I hope that helps you, buddy. Let's move on. We've got Betty Rogers. Hello, Betty. It says, what strings do you use on most of your lead guitars? Do you tune down a half step or a whole step for making the bends? Okay, well, real quick, let's talk about this, okay? So I use relatively thin strings on a regular basis. I do not want to fight my guitar. I have learned a long time ago this whole battle of thick strings versus thin strings. I get it that thick strings are going to give you a better tone, and they will for sure. But I don't want to fight my guitar. You know, I'll feel all guilty, and I'm like, I got to throw some 11s on there and then try and play. And then I can't do my licks. I can't play as efficiently as I normally play. So I stopped playing that game a whole long time ago. Look at my guitar, for God's sakes. It's a pink gem, right? I don't play all of those games. I find what's comfortable for me, what I can use effectively when I need to, when I'm on stage, and that's what I use. You know, I've tried, for instance, Les Pauls for people out there that use Les Pauls. I love the sound of a Les Paul, but it's uncomfortable for me to play. It's heavy. It's awkward because, you know, the bulk of the body of the guitar is back a little bit, that sort of thing. And it's just not what I grew up playing. It's not, you know, the Strat style body is what I grew up playing. So it's nice to own them. I think having a Les Paul is fun to have, but I've tried using them on stage, and they are limiting for me on my abilities on my guitar. And that's why I own like 7 or 8 of these gems in different colors and that sort of thing. Is I tune them differently and use them for different stuff. And yeah, I own a bunch of different guitars, but these are the main ones. So Betty, comfortability is the most important thing. I use 9s tuned standard. That's what I do, is I use 9s tuned standard. And then when I go to half step down, I usually go to 10s and then tune half step down, so it has kind of a compatible feel to it. You know, it would be ideal for me, because I've thought about this a million times, if you had like 9s and then 9.5 and 10 and a 10.5 and that sort of thing. So every time I tune down a half step, I could use like a 9.5 gauge. 9s are what we call extra lights. So when I tune standard, I use 9s. If I tune a half step down, I would use 9.5s. If they're available. Most of the time they're not, though. And again, you can special order things like 9.5s, but if you're playing in some small town and you need strings, very seldom do they have those kind of strings. You buy 9s or you buy 10s, you know, that sort of thing. So do I tune down a half step or whole step for making the bends? No, I make bends with the guitar that I've got. Obviously, if I tune down a half step, I would make the same bends. So the tuning doesn't make any difference. I'm still going to do the bending. And Betty, that's what's really important, is when I'm teaching students a lot, you know, let's say we're talking about something like the Ramones, or talking about Green Day, or some sort of, you know, rock band like that, where these guys will have their guitars slung all the way down like this, and they're playing, and they got thick strings on there, so their rhythms sound awesome, right? But they don't do a lot of soloing. I mean, you'll notice that the guys that do a ton of soloing are people that their guitars tend to be up higher, because they have to get up here. They got to be able to reach things. They got to be able to bend. They got to be able to play effectively. So to be honest with you, as cool as it might look sometimes for people to have their guitars slung low, it becomes much more unreasonable to actually solo efficiently. And that, again, is my point, Betty, is that everything that you do has to be comfortable to you. Even if the guitar looks nice, even if the guitar looks ugly, even if the strings are whatever. You know, I don't take a lot of stock in brand necessarily, you know, D'Addario versus GHS versus whatever. I've tried a million of them. I think it really has to just come down to the feel of the strings. And again, I have a video coming out where we're going to be talking all about string sizes and gauges and why you would use this over this and why you would use this body style of a guitar versus this body style of a guitar. Those are all coming in 2015. And so it'll help you a little bit in understanding those things. But what I have learned is that what's most important to me is that whatever it is I'm playing, if it's an acoustic guitar, if it's an electric guitar, it has to be comfortable. It doesn't matter that you paid $8,000 for it. Just because you paid $8,000 doesn't mean that it's going to be comfortable, right? So with strings, I find that I've used 8 gauge, which is called ultralight, 8 gauge strings on a standard tuned guitar, excuse me. I've used 9 gauge, I've used 10 gauge, and I have a tendency of sort of shifting back and forth. I convince myself that I want thicker strings or thinner strings or whatever, and I'll try them out and give them a try for a while and see how they feel for me. But just like I was talking to, who was it, AJ, I think, about, you know, the trick is comfortability. When you go to do a bend, you want to be able to execute these things comfortably. If you're fighting your guitar, now all of a sudden you've got another mental issue that you're having to deal with on a regular basis, and I can't stand that sort of thing. So I like my guitar to be comfortable. I like my strings to be nice and low to the guitar. It makes it comfortable for me to play, so when I want to do a lot of... you know, when I want to do a lot of legato stuff, it's very easy for me to do. My distortions are set up in a similar manner. I find the right amount of distortion, so I don't have to fight too hard, yet it's not way too much distortion. It's nice to have a little bit of delay. Again, these are all things, Betty, that I'm going to be talking about in 2015 to help you not only learn how to play guitar, but to learn how to set up your guitar, to learn how to find the right guitar, to find the right strings, to find the right delay sound, right distortion sound. All those things to make your life easier, because they really do make a huge difference. We tend to think it's all about our fingers on the guitar, and that's a huge element. But it depends on what you're playing too. You know, if I grab a guitar from a music store and the strings are that far away from the neck, I'm not going to be able to play it as good as I could play my guitar. And so we're all different that way. So hopefully that helps, Betty. I use 9-gauge extra lights on a standard tuned guitar. That's what I would use, and it works perfectly for me. But that doesn't mean that that's perfect for you. You should start learning what gauge of string that you have. If you have an extra light and you like those, then maybe try a different brand of extra light the next time you change your strings. Brands make a difference on the flexibility of the strings. And again, I don't want to get too deep in it, but like this string right here, the circumference of this string is 0.009, which is why they call it a 9-gauge set, or extra lights. But the thickness of that 0.009 gauge, it doesn't get any bigger, but the compressiveness of that string that makes it harder to bend or easier to bend changes from brand to brand. So for instance, if you're playing a GHS set, which I generally play, but I use all kinds of different things, but a GHS set would use, they're fairly thick. They're still the same in circumference, but they're fairly thick to bend, where if you go to like an Ernie Ball set, for instance, they're easier to bend. So if you've ever went, well, that guy's got 9-gauge and I've got 9-gauge, but his is easier to bend, it might be because of the brand of string that you're using. It also makes a difference on how many frets that you've got. Like for instance, this guitar has 24 frets. So the guitar is a little bit longer than, let's say, a 19 or 20 fret Strat, or a Les Paul, for instance. Les Paul has a shorter scale. The shorter scale tends to be easier to bend versus the longer scale. So there's all these different kinds of things that we don't really think about as guitar players that impact our comfortability in playing the guitar. And that's something that's going to be really important for us to study in 2015, is not only your playing ability, which I'm going to keep helping you with, obviously, but what you're playing and why you're playing it. You know, not just because some salesman told you to play. I don't want you to play an Ibanez Gem, right? I want you to play whatever's most comfortable for you. But be aware that all of these elements are going to make a difference. Okay? Let's keep going. Thank you, Betty. So Maria from Tennessee says, are you planning on doing a 60s or 70s class in 2015? And the answer is yes, I am. The 80s masterclass was very well received, and thank you for that. And I've had lots of requests for people saying, well, why not do something on the 60s, or why not do something on the 70s? And I think that's a wonderful idea, and that's going to be coming in 2015. And then another one I've got here is Jessie from Michigan. Hi, Jessie. Thank you, Maria, by the way. Jessie says, how can I warm up my hands for effective guitar playing each day? I totally get this, and the older I get, the harder it gets for me. I have what I refer to as a pre-practice, and then I have my regular practice. When I wake up in the morning, my hands are very stiff. My fingers are very stiff. And so early in the morning, it is not easy for me to do the fluent things that I like to do in the afternoons or when I play on stage in the evenings, like right now. So what I tend to do is I pre-practice or pre-warm-up, where I just get my fingers kind of acclimated to the morning, right, to doing things. So I don't base my frustration level on the first time I grab the guitar in the morning, because if I did that, I would be frustrated every day. I have to get my hands warmed up. I got to get the blood flowing. I got to get my brain in the game, all that sort of thing. So what I have a tendency of doing in the morning is a couple things that are aside from playing guitar. I stretch a lot. I do a lot of stretches, which I've talked about before, and I'll talk about more in 2015. But I stretch my neck, I stretch my shoulders, I stretch my arms, my back, all those things. I stretch out. And I would do these things before I hit the stage. I would be backstage, and I would be, warming up, stretching, that sort of thing. Another thing I like to do is, I live in North Dakota, and right now things tend to get a little bit cold. I run a heater, and I'll always have a heater available to warm up my hands. If I'm on stage, I'll have one right backstage from where my stuff is. I can run back there. I can warm up my hands if I need to. Ideally, I love to have hot water, which at home, obviously, I have. I don't always have that luxury when I'm on stage, but I'll have hot water, and I will run my hands and my forearms. I'll run all of this under hot water. Not scalding hot so I hurt myself, but I have my water pretty darn hot. And then while my hands are underwater, or while I'm running it under hot water, I'll stretch out all my muscles. I'll massage all my muscles, that sort of thing, because it makes a huge difference for me in getting ready. Like right now, my arms are just super, super, super tense. My muscles are super tense. And so it's going to make fluent guitar playing very difficult for me, even my normal practice. So if I can warm up by stretching, which I have not yet done this morning, warm up by running my arms underwater, that sort of thing, hot water, again, whatever's comfortable for you, then I'll stretch out, all that kind of stuff. Then I'll come to my guitar, and I'll start doing just things like my 20-second exercise of just doing these. And I'll just do all of those. And then what I'll usually do is I'll start doing some 3-note per string hammer-ons and pull-offs, where I start doing things like this. I'll go, right now I'm on the 2nd string on the 5th fret. I'll go 5, 7, 8 like this. And I'll feel that those are very tense when I first start doing this pre-practice or pre-warm-up. All of that stuff will be very tense for me because my muscles are just not ready. So I'll just practice little isms of like that. I don't have to set my metronome or anything. I'm just trying to stretch things out. I'm just trying to stretch out my fingers, the muscles in my hand a little bit, the tendons, right? Just different things like that. Then I'll start picking. And again, not really an exercise per se. I'm just trying to kind of find my balance. And as I'm doing it, I'm trying to focus on relaxing, right? Relaxing my shoulder, relaxing my neck, all that sort of thing. Kind of getting things warmed up. And that's what I do for pre-practice, is I'll just sit and kind of noodle on things, trying to get my left hand warmed up a little bit. My fingers, especially, of course, these two, right? These are the two fingers that are hardest to warm up. And then I'll start doing my right hand a little bit, trying to get some things warmed up. And then I'll just start kind of what I call blasting. Where I start kind of synchronizing elements. I'll just start kind of doing some things like that. So I'm not really into full-fledged practice right now. I'm just trying to get everybody warmed up on my right side, on my left side, get my brain kind of in the game a little bit. If I've got some particular licks that I like to play, or a pattern that I like to play, I'll start kind of messing around. Again, I'm not trying to go as fast as I can. I'm just trying to get things synchronized. And I'll do that pre-practice on the way to a show. If I'm traveling, I'll be doing this in the vehicle, whatever vehicle I'm traveling in the back seat or in the back of the van or the bus or whatever it might be. I'll just practice these elements, trying to get everything warmed up. Just kind of get things going. And once I've got my body warmed up, I've got my arms warmed up, I got my head in the game a little bit, then I'll start hitting my actual practices, and that's where I'll do my 4s across the guitar. Start doing all that. They're going to be a lot faster though because I've already warmed up. I'll start doing my 3s or my pentatonics, my 3 patterns. Those kind of things. I'll do a lot of tremolo picking patterns where I do. I'm just trying to kind of synchronize my hands a little bit. I'll do a lot of that for warm-up. But to be honest with you, Jesse, my warm-ups, ideally, my warm-ups are about a half an hour to an hour. I mean, and it has practice elements in there. I mean, I'm practicing my 4s and my 3s and my 2s, 4-finger, 3-finger, 2-finger things, which all of that bleeds right into my realistic playing. I mean, when I go to play, everything I do on the guitar is going to be combinations of 4 fingers, 3 fingers, or 2 fingers. So for me, practice isn't like a distant thing, and then I got my playing. Practice is directly related to my playing because it's getting my alternate picking in sync, it's getting my hands in sync, it's getting my left hand warmed up for legato things that I'll be doing. So practice is absolutely essential to my playing. Without practice, my playing is minimal. You know, if I don't get a lot of practice in, I'm not going to be doing some of the fancier, cooler stuff that I like to do because my hands aren't ready for it, my brain's not ready for it. So that's what I try and kind of focus on. So thank you, everybody, for attending this Q&A masterclass session here, and I hope I got some questions answered for you out there. You know, how to use these elements, how to effectively play them, using the 9th, and you know, the 6th we didn't really get to, but the 6th is going to be treated the same way as the 9th. You know, you're going to use it sparingly, and then you're going to kind of expand and try and use it more as a color tone than just always using it, unless what you're trying to do is use it as a speed pattern or something of more of a technical level. You know, we talked about strings, we just talked about a bunch of different things. So hopefully that helps you all. Remember, please get a hold of us here at GuitarZoom. Anytime you have questions about things, we would be more than happy to help you with anything. And keep sending ideas. If you've got some ideas of things that you would like to see me do for you, let me know. I'm here to help. That's what I'm here for. So take care and have a wonderful weekend, and I'll speak to you soon.